Thank you for joining Jennifer Schatz and Associates in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We are coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are also on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email her directly with the contact information you'll see on the last slide. Right, just a little bit about us. We are a Washington, D.C.-based firm and provide services for federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing and also post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us. We have a few upcoming events, so you can find more information here or also on our website. And we now offer advertising, so you can email me if you need more information on that. And our webinar today is sponsored by AccuTrack, and here's a short message from them.
AccuTrack Consulting and Accounting Services is an 8A WOSB CPA firm committed to supporting entities to sustain growth in government contracting. Our outstanding DCAA accounting solutions reduce audit risk, improve cash flows, and give you peace of mind. Contact us today to learn how we can enhance your DCAA accounting efforts.
I'm just going to go back to this slide. Today our speaker is Margaret Cassidy, and she is going to be talking to us about classified contracts facility clearance requirements. Margaret, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mallory. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. As was indicated, I'm going to talk with you today about classified contracts, particularly facility clearance requirements. If we can move to the next slide. What I'm going to discuss as an overview is how one goes about getting a facility clearance so that they may be able to perform classified contracts for the United States government. These are the first steps that you need to take in doing so, and then at our 12:30 seminar, we're going to talk a little bit more detail about what more details about what it takes to get yourself to be considered a cleared contractor able to perform classified contracts. Just as an initial overview, as we go through these requirements and you listen to what is necessary and what the government expects of a contractor who's going to handle cleared contracts, understand and keep in the back of your mind that these procedures are set in place, and the government enables this process because it acknowledges that that contractors are needed to perform many aspects of our government duties that are related to classified operations. At the same time, the government, when hiring a contractor to perform a classified contract, is going to need to transfer over classified materials at times for that contractor to possess. Therefore, the government has created stringent regulations for an entity, a business, to have a clearance in order to perform those contracts. A good way to think about that is that just as persons are afforded a clearance to do particular work for the government, particularly classified work, whether they are inside the government or outside of the government. If someone is going to do classified work, they have to get a personal security clearance, and their background is looked at and reviewed to make sure that they are trustworthy enough to hold classified materials. This process that we're going to discuss today is the exact same analysis, except it is done by the analysis is done by the government of whether or not a corporation or an entity is actually able to be responsible enough and have controls in place to make sure that they can hold classified and work with classified materials so that they protect that materials from spillage or anything else like that. So with that framework, think about this. We're going to be discussing how a business becomes a classified contractor, just as a person gets a classified, gets a security clearance, so does a business. So to start with, the agency that manages this is the Defense Security Services, DSS. DSS views itself and its regulatory mandates require it to be the interface between the government and cleared contractors, or contractors who are seeking to become a cleared contractor, holding a security clearance. And the DSS takes this responsibility very seriously. Although they do provide oversight and sort of make sure that you're complying with the regulations once you do become cleared, at the same time, they do work and believe themselves to be an organization that can assist contractors make sure that they are doing their obligations as a contractor who holds a security clearance as they should, and they help contractors make sure that they do follow the laws and regulations around being cleared. The Defense Security Services is part of the Department of Defense. They are under the responsibility of the Secretary for Intelligence. Although the DSS sits in the DoD, they do manage this process across the other intelligence agencies. They have their main offices in Quantico. However, they have field offices across the United States. If you become a cleared contractor, you're going to interface most regularly with the field office closest to where your cleared facilities are. You'll get to know those DSS reps well, and they will interface and work with you on obtaining your clearance and then doing what you're supposed to do once you have your clearance. Another thing that the DSS does when something has to be classified materials need to be shipped overseas, they help contractors do that. They also make sure that that's done with the regulations as required. One of the things that they're looking for is managing and overseeing whether cleared contractors have any foreign ownership, control, or influence. You're going to hear that term several times through this discussion, as well as in our next discussion. I may refer to it as FOCI. That's the abbreviated word, the FOCI, FOCI. And that's one of the hallmarks of what a contractor is going to have to disclose and show to the government whether or not any foreign or non-U.S. entity or person has the power to control or influence that cleared contractor. DSS also trains DoD and other security professionals to make sure that they know how they're supposed to handle classified materials. But additionally, the Defense Security Services has extensive training and resources for contractors. They've got handbooks, they've got checklists, they've got training, they've got recommended approaches to managing yourself as a cleared contractor. I have their site up there, dss.mil, and if you go through that site, you can find tons of information that DSS develops for contractors. If we can go to the next slide. So as with anything in the government, they have to operate pursuant to certain laws and regulations. And when you are a cleared contractor or you want to become a cleared contractor, some overview of the laws and regulations that apply. The main body of laws and regulations that apply is the National Security Industrial Procedures Manual, the NISPOM. Many people have probably heard of the NISPOM, and what the NISPOM essentially is the regulations that tell a contractor what they must do if they're going to be a cleared contractor holding or accessing classified materials. The NISPOM has reference to and reliance on tons of regulations from both DoD, regulations from the intelligence communities, executive orders that the president writes and says, hey, listen, this is what I expect cleared contractors to do. It is responsible, the NISPOM, through the regulations, is responsible for defining what foreign ownership, control, or influence is, essentially. And then another area of law that we're going to define or get into detail a little bit more is something called CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. Recently, that has been getting a lot more attention over the past couple of years as the United States government has gotten more aggressive about how it polices and monitors CFIUS. If we could go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about CFIUS and why it matters if you are I'm going to talk about foreign ownership, control, and interest first, and then I'm going to go on and talk about CFIUS a little bit more. So, foreign ownership, control, and interest. What this means is if you're a cleared contractor or you are trying to go through the process to become a cleared contractor, you have to disclose as an entity whether you are managed, controlled, owned, or otherwise have a foreign entity or foreign person who has the ability to impact your operations. So although it says foreign ownership, control, and interest, you have to think about this in the most expansive of ways, and you'll see how the government uses this regulation to demand information from contractors to make sure that they don't have foreign ownership, control, or interest of their organization that may impact the security of classified information. You'll see that as we go along through here, but think about this. This is the main purpose of what the government's trying to do. A, is there foreign ownership, interest, or control of the cleared contractor such that classified materials may be exposed improperly? But the other thing, too, that you're going to hear as we go through this presentation as well as the next is, does the cleared contractor, aside from foreign ownership, control, and interest, have the necessary physical, IT, personnel, security, and which includes knowledge, to actually comply with these regulations, not just foreign ownership, control, and interest, but all of the regulations that are required of a cleared contractor? So if you're a cleared contractor, you have to disclose whether you have foreign ownership, control, and interest. And what this essentially means is that a non-U.S. person or entity has the power, either directly or indirectly, to control a company's operation. And through that control, it may result in a non-U.S. person accessing classified information or may adversely affect the performance of a classified contract. And what you need to think about here is that little phrase, directly or indirectly. So, example, you are a small business and 47% of you is owned by a non-U.S. person. The U.S. government would consider then that you obviously have foreign ownership, you obviously have foreign interest. And even if you say to the government, they are a silent investor, they don't have any authority in how we run our operations, the other 53% is owned by U.S. citizens, and maybe those U.S. citizens even have security clearances themselves, so really this is of no moment because it's a silent investor. The government would not consider it as such because they would be looking at, does that person have some ability to control what's going on? And the answer would be yes, even though they don't own the majority of the company. So the government looks at this requirement every way you could possibly imagine. It's not just percentage of ownership or what their duties are, relationship to the company. They look at every possible way. They turn this idea of foreign ownership, control, and interest in all sorts of undergo all sorts of analysis to determine, is there some way for a foreign person to control the entity that has classified materials? And so think about this as we continue this discussion, because it's why you will see, it's the reason behind why the government asks so many questions about how you're running your business. If we can go to the next slide. The next slide now is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Closely related, I realize that this is a repeat slide. I can get this information out to Jennifer and her team if need be. But essentially, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States is a compilation of different agencies across the United States, across the U.S. government. There's the Department of Treasury, which sort of takes the lead on this, but they are joined by the Department of Energy, the Department of State, Department of Commerce. They are joined by the Department of Defense, as well as the intelligence community. And what the Committee on Foreign Investment does is it determines whether or not in the instance that a U.S. company is going to be purchased by a non-U.S. entity, a foreign entity, is that purchase somehow going to impact our national security in one way or another? Think about this in the broadest of terms. If a non-U.S. entity were to buy the company that supplied energy to New York City, the U.S. government would say that may be an issue of foreign ownership that we do not want to occur because we don't want a foreign entity to own the power source for all of New York City. It exposes us to a security risk if somebody else has the ability to turn off all power to the city of New York. It also includes if you are a government contractor and you develop certain classified or even unclassified products or services for the United States government, the United States government may determine that they don't want foreign ownership of that entity. They also may determine that they don't want foreign ownership in you, even if you're not a government contractor, but you're developing some sort of cutting edge IT or some sort of cutting edge technology, and they think that getting that technology into the hands of a non-U.S. entity through the ownership of your company would expose the United States to security or other national interest risks. The committee can stop the investment. And by investment, it means a merger, it means an acquisition, significant ownership or takeover of your company. And the rules require that if you believe that if you are getting ready to be purchased by or have a significant investment by a foreign entity in your organization, if you think about it in the broadest of terms, does my organization in any way, if it were owned by a non-U.S. entity, it have the potential to impact our national security, then you need to take and disclose the transaction to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. The committee then will decide whether the transaction can go through. Recently, like I said, the committee has gotten more aggressive, and there's been a lot of newspaper stories where the committee has said that certain Chinese companies are unable to buy certain U.S. companies. A lot of them were tech companies because they're concerned. The committee is concerned that the Chinese purchasing particular technology may expose the U.S. government or the U.S. national security to some type of risk. So always think about this. In addition to your requirements as a cleared contractor, even if you're not a cleared contractor and you do something in any way that may have an impact on the U.S. national security, you should consider, if you're going to get purchased by a foreign entity, whether you need to go to the committee to make a disclosure about that transaction. It's not an easy analysis to make, and then the committee will undertake the analysis, but it is something that you need to think about. So if we move to the next slide. So let's say you are not a cleared contractor, and now you have decided you want to become a cleared contractor. What is that process like? What does it require? First, you have to be sponsored by the federal government contracting agency that is going to or wants to work with you to give you classified contracts. Or you could be sponsored by a cleared contractor. So if you are a smaller business or even a large business and you want to team up with a cleared contractor to perform a classified contract, then that cleared contractor can sponsor you as well. Suffice to say, you simply need sponsorship either by the federal government or by a cleared contractor who will say in their sponsorship, yes, this entity needs to have a classification. They need to be a classified facility in order to do this particular type of work. Once that happens, DSS begins its review process. And the contractor who wants to get cleared needs to start by looking at the DSS site that I referenced earlier in this presentation. That site has handbook, guidance, and checklists. The reason you need to spend time there and you need to read these documents and you need to read and consider things like the NISPOM that we talked about earlier is because eventually DSS is going to conduct both a phone survey and a site visit if you make it through that part of the process, where you're actually going to be questioned about your understanding and knowledge of these laws as an organization, and DSS is going to expect you to be able to say that you know the laws, you know the regulations, and expect you to explain to them how you're going to make sure that you follow those laws and regulations. Another part of this process is making sure that you have your CAGE code, which is required, and you need to be registered in SAM, System for Award Management. Once you sort of have kicked off the process, DSS will conduct a phone survey. In the course of that phone survey, like I said, you're going to be asked about the laws, you're going to be asked about the regulations, you're going to be asked about your organization's understanding of the laws and the regulations, and you're going to be asked about how your particular entity is going to follow the laws and regulations that dictate what a cleared contractor is required to do, such thing as having physical security, such things as having IT security, such things as making sure that only cleared persons interact with the cleared materials and on the cleared contracts in most instances. You will also be questioned about your leadership. You'll be questioned about who's going to have the ownership responsibility of making sure that you follow the clearance laws and regulations. That is usually a federal security officer, an FSO. And that person should understand these laws and regulations and make sure that you as an entity are following them. After the phone survey, DSS conducts a site visit. At this site visit, they're going to continue their discussions with leaders. They're going to continue their discussion with security officials. They're going to inspect your site, and they're going to make sure, again, that physically you have the capabilities to handle classified materials, that your leaders and your security officials understand the laws and regulations that you have to follow to handle classified materials and to be awarded classified contracts. They will look at your IT systems to see how those operate. They will look and see what sort of training you have for your people. And they will look at all of these sorts of things to make sure that they feel comfortable that A, you know the laws and regulations, B, you have controls in place to follow those laws and regulations, C, that your leaders and a security official are capable of making sure that going forward you're going to follow those laws and regulations. And they want to find out how you're going to do that. So that's part of the security clearance process as well. If we can go on to the next slide. So from a very practical perspective, what you need to do is you would register online and you complete something called an EFCL. It's your online electronic federal clearance paperwork documentation. At the highest of levels, you're going to identify your organizational structure, and then you're going to identify the name and the representative of your company, usually a federal security officer, who is going to be responsible for making sure that your facility, your entity, maintains its clearance. Now remember, if you are seeking a federal clearance for your business and you have multiple locations, your business may get cleared as a business, but then you may say to the DSS, listen, this is the only facility physically where the classified materials are going to be, and this is how we're going to wall them off. So even if you're only going to be doing classified work out of one part of your business or one of your locations, you still are going to need to get cleared as an entity and then show the DSS why those materials are only going to be in one particular location. If we can go on to the next slide. That is what will wrap us up today from this part one of getting yourself becoming a contractor who can handle classified materials. That is the beginning of the process. That's how it starts, and the things that you should start thinking about. Who in your organization is going to need to understand the clearance requirements? Who in the organization is going to administer and manage them from day to day? And with that, that is the very introductory portion of our presentation on kicking off getting yourself classified as a contractor. One other word to note is once you get classified, you've got to keep all of this stuff updated. At 12:30, we're going to have part two of this that gets into a little bit more detail of what this process is like and what sort of information you need to disclose to the government. Until then, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Margaret, for sharing your knowledge and insight today. Today's presentation has been recorded and can be found on our website or YouTube channel within about 48 hours. If you have questions about today's topic, please contact Margaret with the phone number or email shown on your screen. Thank you, everybody. This concludes the webinar.